Okay, so negotiation. I feel like we hear that word and it like instantly brings to mind these like really intense images,
Oh, absolutely.
like hostage situations and high stakes business deals.
Right, right.
But today we're diving into a book that argues that negotiation is actually something we do every day in all aspects of our lives.
Yeah, definitely. The book is Never Split the Difference.
Oh, I've heard of this. It's by that former FBI hostage negotiator, Chris Voss.
Yeah, but that's the one. And, he makes this really interesting point right off the bat. He says all those, like, traditional negotiation strategies we often hear about,
Hmm.
the whole win-win approach, they often backfire.
Really? Why is that?
Well, they kind of assume that everyone involved is, like, totally rational,
Okay, yeah.
that we all make decisions based on logic.
Right.
But let's be honest, humans are, well, we're not always the most rational creatures, are we?
That's an understatement.
Exactly. And that's where Voss's experience gets super interesting. The FBI realized, like, decades ago, that especially in those really high-stakes situations, you have to get inside the emotional brain, not just the logical one.
Okay, so how does that actually work? How do you practically apply that?
So one of Voss's core principles is something he calls tactical empathy.
Oh, this is good. I've heard about this. It's not just about being like, sympathetic.
Right, it's not just about being nice, exactly. It's more about strategically using empathy to kind of gain an advantage in the negotiation.
Okay, now that's what I'm talking about. Give me an example. How did he use this, like, in the field as a hostage negotiator?
So Voss talks about his very first hostage negotiation, bank robbery standoff, New York City.
Oh, wow.
Two hostage takers inside, Chris Watts and Bobby, holding a bunch of people. And, like, to make matters worse, the negotiator, that was Voss in this case, had been told this was some big international terrorist group.
Talk about pressure.
Intense pressure, right. So you're in that situation and you realize you can't just, like, make compromises the way you might in a business deal. You need everything you ask for, no exceptions. Lives are on the line.
Right, wow. So how do you even begin to navigate that?
That's where tactical empathy becomes so essential. Like, he had to find a way to connect with these guys, understand what was driving them.
Okay, so how did he actually use tactical empathy in this case?
He started with this technique called mirroring. Basically, he would just repeat the last few words that Bobby, one of the hostage takers, would say, kind of like an echo.
I've totally done that before, though I feel like I wasn't doing it on purpose.
Oh, I'm sure we all have. It's a natural human tendency. But Voss does it very deliberately. Like, if Bobby said, man, I just want this to be over, Voss might say, you want this to be over.
That's so interesting. And that, like, prompts the person to elaborate. You're not even really agreeing with them. You're just, like, reflecting their own words back to them.
Exactly. And it's surprisingly effective. It makes the other person feel heard without you actually having to commit to anything. It taps into that deep human need for connection and validation.
Okay, that makes total sense. What else did he do in that bank standoff?
Another technique he used is called labeling, where you basically acknowledge the other person's emotions out loud.
Oh, interesting. So, like, what would he say? Something like, you seem really angry right now.
Yeah, or like, it sounds like you're feeling trapped, or something like that. Just labeling the emotion directly.
Okay, so you're validating their feelings, letting them know you see where they're coming from.
Right. And here's where it gets really powerful. After labeling an emotion, he would often just go silent. Not like awkward silence, but a very deliberate pause.
Ooh, strategic silence.
Exactly. It gives the other person space to process, and often they'll end up revealing more than they intended just to fill the void.
It's amazing how much we communicate in those silences, isn't it?
It really is. And what's interesting is that Voss says these techniques aren't just for extreme situations like hostage negotiations. He found they work in everyday life too.
Oh, absolutely. I can already think of like a million different ways this could be helpful.
He gives this great example of a student who used mirroring with her boss. Her boss was demanding paper copies of everything, even though all their projects were digital, and it was causing a lot of tension.
Oh, I know that type.
Yeah.
Some people just love their paper trails.
Right. So by simply mirroring her boss's concerns, the student was able to uncover this like hidden desire. The boss didn't actually care about paper. He just wanted easy access to the information.
Oh, that makes so much more sense. So it wasn't really about the paper at all. It was about the convenience factor.
Exactly. And once the student understood that, she was able to suggest a digital solution that addressed his real need, which was for convenience. And it completely diffused the tension.
That's amazing. Just by using tactical empathy, she was able to find a solution that worked for everyone.
Right. And it really highlights how often we miss these like underlying motivations in our everyday conversations when we're not really tuned in to where the other person is coming from.
Absolutely. This already has me wanting to hit rewind on some recent conversations I've had. But let's move on because I know we've got a lot more to unpack from Never Split the Difference.
Yeah.
What other like game-changing insights does Voss have up his sleeve? So we've got this whole tactical empathy thing, which is super interesting. But what else? What other like FBI-style tactics does he bring to the table?
Well, this one might surprise you. Voss is a big believer in the power of no.
Really?
Yeah. And I don't mean just like being negative or saying no to everything, but actually understanding how to use no strategically in a negotiation.
Interesting. Usually we're told to be agreeable, especially, in a professional setting.
Yeah.
So why does he say no is so important?
Because a lot of times when we say yes, it's kind of meaningless. Like it's just a pleasantry, not a real commitment.
Right, yeah.
But no is where the real negotiation begins. It sets a boundary, gives the speaker a sense of control. And it can often uncover what the other person is really thinking, their true motivations.
That makes a lot of sense. I feel like so often we're so quick to say yes just to avoid conflict or seem agreeable. But then, like later, we're kicking ourselves because we didn't actually want to do that thing.
Exactly. And Voss actually has a really great story about this from his early days at the FBI.
Oh, let's hear it.
So he really wanted to join the hostage negotiation team, right?
Of course.
But he had zero experience.
Oh, boy.
So they basically told him, no, go volunteer at a suicide hotline first, and then we'll talk.
Oh, wow.
And that rejection, it really ended up being this turning point for him. It forced him to think about the power dynamics of conversations. Like, who has the power and how do you shift it?
That's so interesting. So even though he initially heard no,
Yeah.
which is what he didn't want, in a way it helped him get what he wanted down the line.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, like, have you ever encountered a situation where hearing no actually made you want something more?
100%.
Yeah.
It's like it suddenly becomes this forbidden fruit. The minute it's less available, it seems more desirable.
Yes, exactly. The principle of scarcity at work. But, it's not just about being manipulative, right? It's about understanding that sometimes saying no allows you to get what you actually want, even if it's not what you initially thought you wanted.
Okay, so we've got tactical empathy and the power of no. What else?
Okay, get ready for this one, because he introduces this whole concept he calls bending reality.
Bending reality. Okay, I need a little more on that. What does he mean by bending reality?
So it's about framing the negotiation, presenting it in a way that influences how the other person sees things, how they value things.
Okay, yeah.
And he draws on these psychological principles. For example, prospect theory. Have you heard of that?
I feel like I've heard of it, but you're going to have to remind me.
Okay, so it basically says that people are more motivated by avoiding a loss than by achieving a game of equal value.
Oh, okay. Like I'd be more upset about losing $20 than I would be happy about finding $20.
Exactly. And Voss uses this brilliantly. Like, there's this one story where he's trying to negotiate a lower speaking fee.
Okay.
So instead of, starting high and then working his way down, he actually anchored the conversation lower, like really low.
How could you do that?
He'll mention some ridiculously low fee that he got paid one time, like years ago.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. So by setting that low anchor, it made his actual desired rate seem much more reasonable in comparison.
Exactly. It's like he was bending reality just by shifting their focus. Instead of them focusing on what they might have to pay, he made them focus on what they might lose out on if they didn't book him.
That's so clever. And again, it's like it just goes to show how much a negotiation is really about psychology,
Yeah.
understanding human behavior.
Right. Which brings us to another really crucial concept, black swans.
Black swans. Okay, that sounds kind of ominous. What's a black swan?
It can be, yeah. So a black swan is basically like this unpredictable event that has these huge consequences. Think about those times when someone does something in a negotiation and you're like, they're crazy.
Well, I've been there.
Yeah.
So Voss is saying those moments are actually opportunities.
Exactly. Because they're often clues to some hidden piece of information.
Like some constraint they're under or something they really want but haven't vocalized.
Exactly. Something that can totally change the game if you can figure it out.
Okay, so how do we spot these black swans?
Well, first of all, really listen. Voss says we miss so many clues because we're so focused on our own agenda. He also suggests, like, having other people listen in, like backup listeners whose only job is to pay attention to what's being said between the lines.
It's like having a whole team of detectives searching for clues.
Exactly. And Voss actually tells this really tragic but important story about an American missionary, Martin Burnham, who was held hostage in the Philippines. Back then, the FBI, like, they just didn't believe that hostage takers would actually kill on deadline.
Really.
Yeah, they just thought it was, like, unthinkable.
And that assumption, tragically, turned out to be wrong.
Yes. Burnham was killed when the deadline passed. And, that event, it totally changed the FBI's approach to hostage situations. It showed them that you can't assume you know the limits of what's possible.
That's a really sobering thought, but so important. Because our assumptions can really blindside us, can't they?
They really can. But on a more positive note, there are positive black swans, too.
Oh, okay. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. Voss tells this other great story about this drug dealer in Pittsburgh who had no negotiation training whatsoever, but he managed to ask these really effective questions during a hostage situation just by being himself.
Wow, really? How did that happen?
It was his authenticity. He was just asking what genuinely mattered to him.
That's amazing. So I guess what you're saying is that black swans can go both ways. The key is just being able to recognize them and, like, adjust your approach accordingly.
Exactly. Sometimes those moments when we're tempted to, like, write someone off as crazy, those are actually the most valuable opportunities to uncover some really important information.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, from tactical empathy to the power of no, to bending reality, to spotting black swans. This is a lot. This is definitely giving me a lot to think about. Okay, so much good stuff here, but let's get into, like, trickier territory. What about those times when you think someone might be lying to you in a negotiation? Any tips for spotting a liar?
Well, Voss says it's not usually about finding one big obvious sign, but rather looking for, like, a cluster of behaviors.
A cluster of behaviors, okay.
Yeah, like one thing he points out is that liars often avoid using the pronoun I. They'll say we or they to kind of distance themselves from the statement.
Oh, interesting. So instead of saying, I need this project done by Friday, they might say, we need this project done by Friday, even if it's really just on them.
Exactly. Like,
Right.
they're subtly trying to shift the responsibility.
Wow, sneaky. What else?
Also, pay close attention to any inconsistencies between their words and their body language.
Okay, yeah. Like someone might say yes while, like, subtly shaking their head no.
Exactly. Or their voice might lack conviction. Like, they're saying the words, but they don't really mean them.
Those subtle cues can be so revealing. It's like that
Yeah.
saying, listen to what they're saying with their body, not just their words.
Right. And Voss also emphasizes the importance of listening to what's not being said.
Okay, interesting. What do you mean by that?
Like, liars often avoid getting into specifics. They keep things vague because, it's harder to get caught in a lie if you're not giving away too many details.
That's a really good point. Okay, so we're on high alert for those slippery word choices, any inconsistencies in body language. What about dealing with, like, really aggressive negotiators?
Mm-hmm.
Those personalities that just seem set on steamrolling you. Any advice for handling those types?
Yeah, Voss actually advises against mirroring their aggression.
Really? Because that seems kind of intuitive. Like, you have to fight fire with fire, right?
You'd think so, but he says it usually just escalates the situation.
Okay, that makes sense.
Instead, he recommends using those calibrated questions we talked about earlier. Like, if someone throws out a totally unreasonable demand, instead of getting defensive, you could say something like, okay, I see, and how am I supposed to do that?
Oh, I love that. It's like you're turning their tactic back on them. You're forcing them to actually justify that crazy position.
Exactly. Plus, it buys you time to think because you don't want to just react impulsively in those situations. And don't be afraid to set boundaries. It's totally okay to say, hold on a second, I need a few minutes to think this through.
That is so important. I think we often feel pressured to like have an answer right away, especially when someone's coming on strong. But taking that pause can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. And, this reminds me of another one of Foss's big takeaways, which is that preparation is key. Like, before you even go into a negotiation, he recommends creating what he calls a negotiation one sheet.
A negotiation one sheet.
Yeah, and it's basically an outline. You map out your goals, you think about what the other side's motivations might be, you jot down some key questions you want to ask.
So it's like having a roadmap for the negotiation, something to help you stay on track, especially when things get heated.
Exactly. But even with the best preparation, it's important to remember that negotiation is a dynamic process.
Yeah.
You have to be ready to, like, adapt on the fly, Listen for those black swans we talked about. Be open to new information that might change the game.
It's like we've been saying this whole time. Understanding human behavior is just as important as any tactic or technique.
100%. And ultimately, Voss says negotiation shouldn't be a battle. It's about finding creative solutions that actually work for everyone involved.
I love that. Well, this has been such an eye-opening conversation. Never Split the Difference is packed with so much practical advice and, honestly, just really fascinating stories. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of what negotiation really
Me
is.
too. It's not just about getting what you want. It's about communicating clearly, building rapport, and finding common ground, even in those really tough situations.
Absolutely. This has been fantastic. But I'm curious, as we wrap up here, what's the biggest takeaway you're personally walking away with from this deep dive?
That's a good question. For me, it's the importance of tactical empathy. And I think sometimes people hear that and they think it means being a pushover. But it's not about that at all. It's about really, truly trying to understand the other person's perspective, even if you don't agree with it. And that understanding, it's so powerful.
I couldn't agree more. And the best part is, it's a skill that anyone can learn and develop with practice. So to everyone listening, if you're feeling empowered to negotiate more effectively in your own life, that's what we want.
Absolutely. Now go out there, embrace the power of no, ask those calibrated questions, and remember, there's always a way to negotiate a better outcome.
Love it. And there you have it, folks. Another deep dive complete.